Today, we're excited to welcome Sam McIntyre, a former CIO with over 30 years of tech experience, including 15 years at top leadership roles. Sam has been a standout at renowned organisations such as Coles Myer, Daimler Chrysler, Tesco, Woolworths Group, Simplot, L'Oreal, Bega Cheese, Suzanne, One Roof Women, Target, and now Tech Boosters. Her impact goes beyond the boardroom. Sam is also an executive coach passionate about empowering women in technology. She hosts the Lady Leadership podcast, where she shares insights from inspiring women leaders on career growth, leadership, and diversity. Join us as we explore Sam's incredible journey and a mission to help 100,000 women advance their tech careers.
Is just about to turn 17. So that was very much a sliding doors moment. So instead of going to live in LA and work on that project for a year, I ended up staying in the UK, and then we ended up coming back to Australia off the back of that. So
what a terrible burden for your son to know he destroyed your dreams.
Not so much,
So I was going to ask how you come back to Melbourne, and I did smile when I saw that you came back to Woolworths. I thought you're just obsessed with bloody supermarkets at this point in your career. But you spent, I think, then 5 years with Woolworths here.
Yep.
And sort of three different roles, I think, through that time from what I could kind of take in. But so what was happening in that time, and how was your career kind of shaping and evolving?
So came back, had my son, his name's Reese, and was in Melbourne. And at the time, I think Wesfarmers had just actually bought Coles, and so I had the desire when I come back to work for one of the two big players, to work for Coles or to work for Woolworths. That was the aim. And so I went into Coles, and at the time I had a 5-month-old baby at home. And I did mention that. And it might have been part of their decision, maybe not to bring me on board. I'll never know. But I remember I was still breastfeeding when I went for the interviews. I was trying to time the interviews and all the rest of it. Anyway, and so they ended up turning around and saying, we can't bring anyone external in at this time. So it was going to be a senior role running their merchandise systems for them, which was not so much my background, but I'd kind of done, everything else. The way I'd done everything either side of all of that. And merch is huge from a systems for retail's perspective. So it would have been a good challenge. And then so in that time, I remember waking up in the middle of the night and crying because I didn't get that job. And my husband waking up going, what is wrong? And I was crying because that was like the plan, right? What ended up happening was someone from Woolworths went to the States, went and visited Tesco. Someone in Tesco said to the guy who'd come from Woolworths, I know someone who's just gone back to Australia. You should look her up. Wow. So that bloke did look me up. And, I ended up going and working for Woolworths instead. So we'd only been back in Australia. We'd probably been back in Australia for a year. We were in Melbourne, and then within a month we relocated with an 8-month-old to Woolworths in Sydney. So to a big job. So I was running a $16 million budget for them for their stores, for all their IT projects across all of their brands. So excuse me.
Did you have family, friends, and so forth in Sydney?
No, we had some friends, right? Yeah. But we were also just new parents, so we had an 8-month-old when we went there, and so
that's incredibly tough.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah.
So, and it was really interesting too, right? Because I come from the UK, and I think in the UK you share a little bit less about yourself maybe in the workplace. You're a little bit more reserved, I think, as a culture.
That's right. I'll go with your casual racism. That's okay. Go on.
No. But I think you just, you tend to hold...
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Yeah. It's more, I'd say the UK is more... maybe a bit more transactional, as in you come in, you do your job, you know your colleagues, whereas I found Australia's much more relational. People want to get to know a bit more about you and your story.
People ask you a lot more questions than, say, what people would ask you in the UK. So I was very used to that way of operating. I then go into, a big workplace, Woolworths, in a senior role with a big team. I had like 40 project managers, 4 or 5 program managers reporting into me, $60 million worth of projects, 100 projects we were running, and I had an 8-month-old. I just remember keeping that quite personal at the time because I didn't want someone to judge me or so it was always very much, and, you know, like I said, this is 17 years ago, right? I didn't want anyone to judge what I was capable for or not tap me on the shoulder for something because they thought I had a young child at home. And so it wasn't like, if people asked me if I had a child, I would say yes, right? But I didn't have a picture of him on my desk. I didn't openly kind of I was very work focused.
Just very conscious to not have a picture on your desk or
and those were the days when you had pictures of your cats and stuff on your desk.
Your desk was your domain, right? And
that's
you
right.
kind of you owned it and
had
personalised
nothing.
it. Yeah, wow, okay.
And it was, look, I would say too, it was quite the adjustment going from a big role in, I went to Woolworths too because I thought it was quite exciting, and I'd come back to Melbourne, had a baby, he was amazing, but I was at home and I was a bit bored, really. In the nicest possible way. Because I'd gone from like an international career for a large organisation delivering things at pace. Like we were at Tesco, we were rolling out multiple countries at the one time. I was running, you know, putting warehouse solutions into Turkey, into China, into Hungary, into the US consecutively, right? With a team of people in those places, with different stakeholders. We had, you know, everyone, it's so funny, I think now, everyone's like, oh, flexible working and, you know, working from home and all the rest of it. We were working from all parts of the world, right? I knew at that point who was delivering and who wasn't. So I'd gone from that to being at home with a newborn in Melbourne to then going, and which I loved, right? Don't get me wrong. But it really wasn't a consideration at the time that I would go back to my work and my husband would stay home. Like, it just wasn't a conversation. It wasn't that time. That was quite unusual. And we didn't even think of having that conversation as well. So so then when I got called up by Woolworths, I was like, let's go.
yeah, absolutely. Did you, because you were with Woolworths, I think 5 years. That whole time was in Sydney?
Yes.
Right.
Oh, well, actually, no. So I did that role for a while. I then got promoted into heading up technology for the liquor division. They kind of restructured. So I actually got promoted, ended up reporting into Dan Beecham at the time. You know, we were running IT for all of the brands for Woolworths. He had a team of 18 direct reports. There was 3 women on that team, so 15 men, 3 women. I was still in my 30s. And, you know, I then had my second child in Sydney. So I did that role running IT for liquor, which was the liquor brand in stores. It was Dan Murphy's, even though there was some technology in there as in Dan Murphy's as well. And it was BWS. And then I moved to fuel. And, you know, some of the big things that were happening at the time was all the self-checkouts in those stores. We were consolidating all the point of sale across all of those different brands. You know, Woolworths was building some of their own data centres. I ran the first online e-commerce project for Woolworths as well. So that was all happening. So it was, you know, it was pretty exciting times, lots of interesting stuff. I then had my second son and he and then I remember going into so obviously the family were all actually in Melbourne, and so after we had him, my husband was working for realestate.com at the time, which was also doing incredible things. He'd gotten a role with them when we come back from the UK. He was able to relocate with them to Sydney as well. They were great. We then decided we'd come down here, and we were like, what are we doing in Sydney with 2 kids? You know, the adventure had worn off a little bit by that point. And we decided to return to Melbourne. And so I went into Dan, and so this describes who I am as well as a person. We had also bought a house and renovated it as well as, so not only was I running, like, I look back now and think, what was wrong with me? You know, I had a toddler, took a big role, got a bigger role, bought a house, renovated that house. We had another place in Melbourne, decided to renovate that as well, a unit as well. So I was doing all of those things. And then I went into Dan and said, look, we've actually sold our house. We've decided to go back to Melbourne. Now, he was great. He actually, Woolworths had at the time purchased a business called Danks. They had also gone into the hardware sector as well with the business starts with M. Doesn't exist anymore.
Okay, I'm not going to be happy there with that.
Yeah, they were like a big box hardware store.
Yeah.
They'd done a partnership with Lowe's. And so Danks was actually based in Melbourne. So I then was able to pick up a role as a program type. It was actually a business role. I was running some programs for them around consolidating. They had about 40 odd other hardware stores in Tasmania, and they actually bought a mill and all sorts of different stuff. Right. So again, very startup-ish and very kind of So I was 2 kids. Renovating another house as well. Decided to do that as well. Again, quite crazy, right?
So at what point then? Because obviously when you left Woolworths, you then went to Simplot as CIO.
Yeah.
So obviously you were a bit bored and needed again. How did you know you were ready for a CIO role?
Yeah, look, I mean, I'd headed up IT for liquor and fuel, right? And so that was very much a quasi-CIO for those businesses. So that sat on the management teams for those businesses, dual reporting into Dan, who was CIO at Woolworths, and then into the business leader of those businesses, right? So very much that exec team type situation. And so when I'd come down to Melbourne, been working in Danks for quite a while, probably 12 months, I realised that my career with Woolworths was Sydney at the time. Whether they are today or not, I'm not sure, but kind of my opportunities were limited by being in Melbourne working for that business. It probably would be different these days. And so therefore decided that I wanted to explore. By then it was funny. I went to an interview as like a program manager role with that organisation, and they said to me in the interview, our CIO is retiring. Would you be interested in the job? And of course I said yes. So I went in on the proviso that he was retiring and that I would step into that role. It wasn't a given. Those things never are, but that was the idea.
Okay, so there was a kind of transition period. Okay. So
it ended up only being a couple of months. So
okay. Right. So it wasn't like a succession plan as such. It was more of a kind of hand over the guard, so to speak, change of the guard.
Yeah.